Can you hear me? Yes. Pretty hard, actually, to make an elegant entrance walking in the sand. But whatever. Well, so I come from the Gapminder Foundation, and we do, our mission statement is to create a fact-based worldview that everyone can understand. It's a pretty, bold mission statement, but, I mean, basically, we will be busy forever. Skip that one. And what we do then is that we are working on 3 mega misconceptions, and that is what we are always trying to frame in different ways. The first one is that the world is divided in two. That is something that we have noticed. We've been working with this for like 20 years, that very often people's worldview, people tend to think that the world is divided in two, poor and rich and so on. The other one is that people tend to think that the world is getting worse. And the third, the world population just increases. So basically, everything we do is different blends of these 3. That's it. And we do it in many different ways. So we started by actually developing interactive tools, like this bubble chart, and you can actually play with it. You can see it like here. If it had loaded. That means. Now you cannot see it. No, yeah. So basically like this one. Here are all the countries of the world. You see them, the color by the region. And we can choose, for instance, Netherlands. The size is because of the size of the country. And we can see Netherlands here at the top. And being at the top means on this axis it's poor to the left, rich to the right. You have unhealthy to the bottom and healthy to the top, basically. So that is how long you live. And you can see Netherlands being in the absolute top in a global comparison. So we were developing tools like this where you could play and you can select and you can do stuff. And we had the very naive idea that if we do that, people will start using these tools and they will change indicators on the axis. They will look at this, babies per woman, for instance. And then they will just learn, and they will just use all this information and make better decisions. Turns out that people are not that eager to actually explore data themselves. We have learned that statistics is not something that people love intuitively. Doesn't matter if you make it moving, colorful, and so on, still people see it's statistics. So this is where we come from. So we realized gradually that this will not work if we want to make people understand the world. We need to do something else. So we started doing these ones, like income distributions, and you can play them as well, a bit easier to understand. We started doing videos, films, and we improved the search feature at Google because we thought if we get people to actually, when they are looking for the public data out there, if they get a visual instant result, then people will start exploring the data much more. And you can see explore more. Basically, then you come to the bubble chart world. But unfortunately, when we were at Google, we were going through the search logs, trying to figure out what in the whole scope of global public data are people searching for most, and we were going to grab all this data and bring it together into these search results. Unfortunately, what we found was that people were barely searching for public data at all. The only one we could see with some search volume was life expectancy if it was combined with the word cat. So basically, people wonder, how old will my cat be? But they are not so concerned about the global development. That was a big turndown for us. So gradually, we started realizing we might do more teaching materials, try to reach out to school. The only way we can have people learn things, since they don't want to learn on their spare time, is probably to force them to learn in school, right? So that was our new plan. So we started doing that, and we have been working on doing teaching material for a while. But gradually, we started realizing that we never actually wrote down the whole concept that we have been working on in a separate place where you can get it all together. So we started writing a book, and now we have written the Factfulness book. And it's basically Gapminder, but not on the website, but in a book format. It is actually available also in Dutch. And the first time I saw the Dutch version, I have to tell you, I was actually looking at Amazon for our book Factfulness, and then I saw this one, and I didn't really get that that was our book first, so I was thinking, whoa, so the designer of our book must have got, been looking at this book and basically copied it. And I thought that was pretty bad. And then I realized that was actually also our book. Well, so what we do, one of the reasons we wrote the book was actually because we started realizing that people tend to know pretty little about the world. So we started asking some fact questions. So we've been to 14 countries asking the general public fact questions. And I'm going to show you a few examples of those right now. This one, for instance, global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will get warmer, stay the same, get colder. I mean, pretty easy question, right? And we have been asking questions like these to the general public. And you can see it's a huge difference between the answering alternative. It's not in the percentage, like very tiny differences. It's huge differences. And get warmer is, of course, the correct answer. And then you might wonder, so in these 14 countries, unfortunately, the Netherlands is not one of them, I'm so sorry to say, but in these 14 countries, this is the results. So you can see Hungary is actually in the top. 94% got this question right, while in Sweden, only 82%. And when I show this one in Sweden, Swedes get very frustrated and say, ooh, what a failure. But actually, this is a communication success, because what we see here is basically that the general public have a pretty good awareness. Let's see how the results for this question. In the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has almost halved, stayed the same, or almost doubled. And the correct answer here is almost halved. This is how people scored. Not as good anymore, right? In Sweden, at the top, 20% got this right. And it's probably because we were actually asking a follow-up question, asking, how could you know this, for the ones who actually scored the correct answer. And all of them said, because of Anna Rosling, which is basically the co-founder of Gapminder. It's me, Ola, and Hans, and all of us are named Rosling. It's pretty ridiculous. And the reason is, Hans Rosling was a professor of international health in Uppsala. When I was 16, I fell in love with Ola, his son. I had no intent whatsoever to ever work with I would never marry, not get kids, and I would never do something ridiculous as working with my family. Unfortunately, Hans was very charismatic, and he had very interesting problems, and we started helping him for fun, and my whole work life has been together with my husband and my father-in-law, and now I'm married and have 3 kids, whatever. So, with the same guy, yes. So basically, but this is the interesting part. 25% got this right, and that is not very impressive. If a chimpanzee would have gotten 3 bananas to pick from, one A, B, and C, and remember that the chimpanzee cannot read and not write, that chimpanzee would not have been able to read this question, and it would have picked a random banana. That would have ended up 33% should score correctly if they didn't read the question. Unfortunately, they read the question and they got it wrong. This is what has happened. Pretty impressive, the poverty in the world, the global average. Let's see here. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? 20, 50, or 80%. 80% is the correct answer. And here it's not very impressive either. You can look at Belgium maybe, 13% got it right. Sweden 21, but not very good numbers, right? Germany 6%. You see, the chimp, without being able to read the question, would outnumber this easily. And we've actually asked the same question at different conferences, and this is when it gets really sad. So this is the World Health Summit, held 2017, 2017 in the autumn. My husband went up on stage just after Angela Merkel and was asking health experts from, basically the health experts about this vaccination question, and this was their result. You could have hoped for more, right? World Economic Forum, not very impressive. Nobel laureates and medicine scientists, and one of the 5 largest banks. We have signed an NDA, so we're not allowed to say which, but one of them, right? 4% got this right. And just imagine if these are the decision makers, right? And if they get the world this wrong, that must most probably affect how they make decisions. We also went to some conferences. A US news conference, 20%. EU news conference, 6%. A factual filmmaker conference, basically the ones who do all the documentaries. And then a Swedish media festival. And I think this is very interesting, because when we see this, very often we hear that the media, that they're trying to lie to us. They know what the world is like, but then they try to cheat us in different ways. But they don't get it right either. Maybe they do their best, right? So asking these questions, we were actually asking just a handful of questions. And this is how the public in these 14 countries scored. 15% got 0 correct answers. All are with just 3 answering alternatives. I mean, 15% got no one right. That's pretty impressive. And this is how it scored on the different questions. This is where the chimp would have ended up by just guessing and not reading the questions, by the way. One person got 11 right, and that was a Swede. We don't know who, unfortunately. And then nobody got 12 right. Just so you get an idea, this is when we ask different kinds of questions about what people know about the development in the world around us, the global proportions and the global trends. We got very, very sad results. So that is sort of the backdrop for the book. So only 10% were better than monkeys, and that's a pretty sad result, right? Because we can read and write, and we have so much information coming at us all the time when we live in a knowledge society. So it's pretty bad that we don't really get it. So here are some examples of things that has actually improved. I'm going to show you briefly. Legal slavery has went down. Deaths from disasters. Leaded gasoline almost gone. Fewer children dying. Fewer people dying in plane crashes. We have more movies to choose from. We have better immunization. More music. The nature is more protected now than ever. And how can we be that wrong? Because when we look at a lot of these trends, we actually see positive development, but people are very negative, because when they were answering our questions, they basically always went for the bad results, thinking that the world was much worse than it actually is. And I think most of it comes down to what we see in the media. So it's not per se that the media tries to fool us, but what we remember from the media. And what do we see then? Well, we see disasters, war, refugee crisis, illnesses. We see paradise, cute animals, and exotic cultures. And how can we make a worldview from that? Because everything we see here is extraordinary events. Pretty hard to get a reasonable overview then. What we need to complement with is everyday reality. So imagine the world as a street where you have the poorest people to the left, the richest to the right, and everybody else somewhere in between. Where would you live? This is a question I have been answering to Swedish students. And basically, they think they are somewhere here. Basically, they're not poor, they're not rich, so they must end up in the middle of the global income distribution. But actually, by just living in Sweden, most likely you belong to the richest billion, just by being in Sweden, right? So we started a project we call the Dollar Street. And the Dollar Street is a pretty simple concept. On this street, we went to houses in different countries on different income levels, and looking at how people sleep, eat, and what toys they have, for instance. And we look at about 135 other things as well. I'm going to show you briefly. So this is a website where you can go and explore. We've been to more than 300 families in more than 50 countries at this point. The goal is to visit at least 10 homes per country on different income levels, so we get a somewhat reasonable coverage on life on different income levels in each country. And just scrolling down here, we can see the families are listed with poorer to the left, richer to the right, and we can scroll down and see some of the families we have visited. The cool thing now is we can go and see the world by beds, for instance. So we just pick beds, the tool chooses beds, and we can see beds all over. Remember the Swedish kids, they said they were in the middle of the income distribution. So let's go there. Something like this, right? But then you can scroll a filter like this. So now we're just looking at beds in the middle of the income distribution. And the Swedish school kids, they don't recognize their own beds when we are in this segment. Neither do they when we come to the poorer end. This is not a typical bedroom of a Swedish kid. While up here in the top corner, it looks pretty much like their bedroom. And these bedrooms are from all over the world, on different places, but pretty much the same, right? We can also look at, for instance, toilets, which is one of my favorites. I educated myself to become a photographer, and that was when I came up with the idea, because my dream was to go around the world and actually take all these photos. Then I got the 3 kids in between really sort of getting to that point, so now other people are doing it. Now it's a community, so you're more than welcome to bring in more homes. So basically here we see all these different toilets, pretty much the same, right? Everyday life looks pretty much the same. But remember, we are in the top end of the street. Let's get all the homes in. Now we have a more representative image, what toilets actually looks like. Because when we are traveling, we tend to stay in this end of the street, even to the destinations we go, even if we are in poorer countries. So what the world is like for most people, we have a hard time understanding. I think you get the concept pretty well here. So let's move on. Here we have on the street, we have a guy brushing his teeth. I don't know if you recognize him. He's definitely on the upper end of the street. It's Bill Gates standing in his bathroom. So basically, we can see what it looks like brushing teeth on different income levels. I had a hard time placing his house. It's sort of out of the street. It should be more out of it. But anyways, now we start more on the street. We go from the richer end, and then we go gradually down to poorer incomes. We're actually getting the internet from my Swedish phone, so if it's choppy, that's why. Look, it looks pretty much the same. Plastic toothbrushes everywhere. Some are very serious, but otherwise it's very much the same. Coming down here to the poorer end of the street, we will start seeing some differences. Because here, people can no longer afford having a plastic toothbrush anymore, so they will brush their teeth with a stick or their finger. So this woman, her wall is actually not only her wall. We tag it as toothpaste as well, because that is how she uses it. So we can zoom in at the US. Upper end of the street, this is the income distribution of the US. We zoom in. We have visited a family in the richer end of the street, the Howards. This is their home. And in the lower end, we have the Hadleys. And we can now look into their cutlery drawers immediately and see the big difference on different income within a country. We can add another family, and we can look at even more cutlery drawers. See, a plastic box with a few cutleries, a wooden drawer specialized for having this cutlery, and then we have this one on the richer end with wooden compartments, with wooden mini compartments for all the extra types. We can look at kitchen sinks, living rooms, and so on. We can do the same in China. 3 homes, 3 families, their homes, the houses, the sofas, and how they are cooking. So often when we talk about how people live, we talk about how it is in a certain country, what the culture is like. But this is within China. At the same time, it happened in parallel, because on different incomes, we do it differently. The cool thing is when we start comparing, so we can see China and US, the 2 richest families we just saw, and we can see their bedrooms. Pretty much the same, isn't it? They both have brown leather sofas and similar play structures, both made in China. And then we can go down to the poorer end, and we can see what life is like here. We take the poorest home in China we saw, but we can compare it with a home in Nigeria. These 2 families doesn't look to have much in common, do they? But look at their ceilings, their sofas, their grain, their fish they're going to have for dinner, or how they are boiling water. This is not so much about culture. It's more how you do things on certain income levels. So cultural stereotypes fall apart pretty much when you start looking at what everyday life looks like. So the world you get from basically the media around you and what you see in the in exciting stories and so on is often the extraordinary and the exciting and the outliers. In Dollar Street, you see the regular life. And sometimes people tell me, but why don't you Google? Why do you send out photographer? That is just an unnecessary hassle. You can just, crowdsource this imagery. It's already captured. Yes, try to write toilet, bed, stove, or home in Nigeria, or home in China. I mean, of course, it's not that these images are lying, but they show what the richest, like 10 or 1%, either have or aspire to get next. It's not a representative image. And in our minds, it's easily skewed when we see this, because we think it's representative because we see so many images. So to understand the world, think of it as 4 levels. You have 1 billion on the poorest level, 3 next, 2, and 1 on the richest level. Looking at transportation, we can understand the world by, in the poorest level, you will see people walking. Then you will have the bike, the motorbike, and the car. And all of us, we're basically up here. Even if we don't have a car, we have access to one if we would need one. We can choose what to eat, and we can look around our stuff. And where do people live then? Well, 7 billion people again. 1 billion live in the Americas, 1 in Europe, 1 in Africa, and 4 in Asia. This is how people live, where people live today. So you can remember the pin code of the world as 1114 to remember where you actually have people. And going into the future, this is what's going to happen. In 2050, UN estimates that this is what the world is going to look like. And in 2100, this is the world. So if we split the Americas and the Europe, we can see the classical West. It's only going to be 8% of the world population in year 2100. Pretty interesting to keep in mind. This is where things will happen. This is where people will be. So the pin code of the world in the future will probably be 1145. Anyone recognize these 2 guys? Yeah, yes. Now? Does it help? Yes. These are the CEOs of Microsoft and Google. And what is cool with them is that both of them are born in India and educated in India. And now they are running these, what we tend to think, classical, like American global companies. So this is where the people live if you look at the different income levels in today. And we have, of course, Satya and Sundar up there. And this is what we think is going to happen in the future if we go forward. So we see the population is basically moving this direction. So to understand the world, we have to remember that we have a lot of people here in Asia that will sort of lead it. So how can we beat the chimp? Remember the questions in the beginning. How can we do it? Well, first we will need facts and frameworks. We need that so when we read news stories, we can put it in a context. And then we need to control our dramatic instincts. 5 minutes is showing me. For a second, I thought, maybe I pretend I didn't see. But I accidentally told you that I saw it, so now I'm screwed. So how can we control our dramatic instincts in our brain then? Because we think those are the ones who actually makes it hard for us to understand the world around us. Well, we have created a set of rules of thumb to control these instincts, and I'm going to walk you through them in less than 5 minutes, I promise, and I'm going to start now. The first instinct is the gap instinct, and we tend to think there are huge differences between poor and rich, good and evil, and so on. But what happens is that we always forget about the majority that is usually in the middle. So whenever we hear about these extremes, we should remember to locate the majority. That would help quite a lot to get the world more correct. The other one is people tend to think that the world is getting worse. And we hear so many stories about things decreasing and declining and getting worse. But it could be part of a positive long-term trend. So we should always remember to ask ourselves, would an improvement get publicity? We never see this. Yesterday, all trains were on time again, right? Then we have the straight line. We tend to think, when we see a trend line, we tend to think it will continue the exact same way into the future. But there are so many different ways a trend can look. For instance, here, if we talk about deaths in traffic, here, these are the levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have basically no people dying at the poor end because you have very little, cars. And in the middle, you start having a lot of cars, bad roads, and bad driving educations, and then we start to get like a zero vision at the end here at level 4. So we should remember that lines might bend, right? Then we have the fear instinct. We tend to get completely overridden by the help, but we should calculate the risks. For instance, when we see this, a lot of us get this anxiety, but it's actually the car that will kill us. So we should sort of try to keep things in context. And we often hear that things are huge, and we get a single number, like this one. We should remember to compare and divide. In 2016, there were more than 4 million kids dying yearly before the year of 1. I mean, it's horrible. What a bad number. But look in 2015 or 1950, it used to be even worse. So we should always compare and divide. Then we have the generalization. We tend to think they are all the same. But we should be careful when we do create these groups. This image, I think we all remember the wave of immigrants coming over the ocean, the Mediterranean, and how sad it was. And it's so easy that in our minds, we think of them as a very homogeneous group. But they are so different. I saw one picture that I'm going to share with you now that I really like quite a lot, this one. Because actually, there was one of these boats accidentally ended up on a nudist beach at Gran Canaria. And I'm just wondering, probably the ones in the boat, they had just survived crossing the Mediterranean. They're just going to come to the land of dreams, and what they see are these pink, naked men, and probably no one had told them that that was the typical European. I mean, so maybe they were, this was the first impression. It's a pretty fascinating meeting, I would say. Maybe not a good one from the European perspective. Then we have the destiny instinct, that we tend to think that things will be very static. But most things are actually improving all the time. In 2007, this is an image from Sweden. In 2017, there was a lot of Polish women coming to Sweden to make abortions, because it's not legal in Poland, right? But in 1960, we had the same flow, but the other way around, because it was illegal to make abortion in Sweden, so we have secret trips going to Poland for abortion. And just remembering that, we tend to think that the Swedish values are so set, or any values, but we tend to think that it's static, which it's not. The single solution, we tend to think that if we have an ideology, we tend to think, 1 minute it says, I will make it, basically get a toolbox, right? We get so stuck in ideology when we try to understand the world around us. Blame, very obvious. We tend to think it was him, but then we stop thinking. Very often it's a complete system. Is there any other explanation? The most important one maybe, the action one, the urgency one, now or never. Remember to take one step at a time. It's so easy to think that we have to act now, while we can usually sit down and think. The most effective changes are usually these ones, pretty boring, pretty slow, and pretty, not very cool. But people meeting up and actually changing things over time slowly is usually pretty effective. So now you have an idea. Basically, if you use these kinds of thinking habits, I hope that you would score better on the test if you were doing it. And I would actually recommend you to do the test. Go to the Gapminder page and take the test there. You can find it, just take the test, it says. And if you score 100% correctly, you get a diploma. So maybe we should do like this. Everything is getting worse. Maybe we should have a warning sign on the news, just like we have on cigarettes. So the news often makes things seem very alarming, right? And we should have like a link so you can go and actually treat yourself with some help, right? So you can get the diploma. If you score all correct, you can do the test over and over again. So finally you will get it. And then you will get this one actually in an email. And it will be numbered so we know which one in the order you are. So please do. We have already certified the Swedish news, the talking heads, these people sitting in the studio. And we've done it with the competing public station report as well. And we think this is how to do it, to gradually have people actually being more fact-based. Schools, we do the same at schools. So factfulness is all about being fact-driven, curious, and humble. And we hope that that will actually help you make better decisions. If you would love to, which I hope you will, you can go here. Here's a special test for you, actually, for your group. If you go here and take the 12 questions, now after talking to me, I can post online your results later tonight. So you just go here, you write menti.com, and then 259706. So please go there and take the test. You do it on the phone, and maybe you get the best results ever. Who knows? Here are where you will find. Probably I post it on the Facebook and the Twitter. You will find a link to the results if you do it. Now I managed almost on 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you so much.